All right. So this is the key question that everyone's arguing about. Quite honestly, we're going to argue this for the rest of eternity, okay? We're going to argue this for eternity because like no one knows. And there's never going to be a clear answer. In fact, there are multiple possibilities, okay? What I'm going to do today is offer you the most simple explanation. In the next class, I will offer you a much more complicated explanation, okay? But the simple explanation is this. Again, this goes back to military doctrine, how the United States military works, okay? And the military doctrine is prevent the heartland from arising, right? So the United States is here, this is Europe, this is Russia, this is Iran, India, China, Japan, this is Middle East, and this is Africa. All right, so the American military doctrine is this. The greatest threat to American power is the heartland unifying, okay? Why? Because if the heartland unifies, it can trade by itself through railways. But America is primarily a naval power. Therefore, it requires people to trade by sea, okay? And so its strategy is to make sure there's never any cohesion in the heartland. Either by making sure that no great power arises in the heartland, and that's why America went to war in World War I and World War II, because there's a great fear that Germany would conquer the world, or Europe, and Asia, and create the heartland, okay? Therefore, America had to stop Germany from rising. So you either make sure no great power arises, or you create so much conflict that they're always fighting each other. And that used to work before, okay? Now, there's a problem. The problem is the BRICS nations. Russia, Iran, and China are coming together. And if they come together, guys, that's a major piece of the heartland. And everyone else, Europe, Middle East, Africa, India, would probably follow, okay? Because it is easier to trade in the heartland than it is trade with America, especially with the US dollar declining, right? So, in other words, the United States has no choice but to fight this war because that's their entire strategy to maintain hegemony in the world, to prevent the heartland from unifying. All right? Does that make sense? Because like once you destroy Iran, the heartland fractures. There's no way that they can now trade together anymore. They're still reliant on American maritime routes, okay? America maintains is still the hegemon because it controls world trade. Whoever controls world trade controls the world. Whoever controls the heartland controls world trade, okay? Does that make sense? Okay, but this is just one explanation. There's actually other explanations, and I'll go into a more complicated explanation next class. All right? Any more questions? Yep.
So you mentioned Saudi Arabia and how it wants to see the downfall of both the US and Iran.
It wants to see the downfall of Israel, US, and Iran.
And to me that sounds like a pretty big goal. And how would they possibly use their strategy to achieve that goal? Or how would it possibly be for Saudi Arabia?
Okay. All right. So it's very confusing to people why Saudi Arabia is actually against Iran, okay? But actually, if you go back and look at their history, they have major conflicts with each other. All right, so let's go over some of their conflicts. All right, so Saudi Arabia, Iran. The first major conflict is that Iran is a theocracy and Saudi Arabia is a monarchy. A theocracy just means that you're ruled by clerics who represent God. But a monarchy is a king who represents God. And for the Iranians, that is blasphemy, that's heresy, that's against the religion, okay? So Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other. Saudi Arabia sees Iran as a threat and trying to induce a revolution within Saudi Arabia. Iran sees Saudi Arabia as blasphemous. Okay? And it's a huge issue because Saudi Arabia is the home of Mecca, Medina, the two holiest sites in the Islamic world. Okay? Second issue is that Saudi Arabia is Sunni and Shia and Iran is Shia. So these are two different sects of the same religion, but it's like Protestants and Catholics. They just hate each other, okay? Okay. And the last thing is that Iran is anti-US and Shia and Saudi Arabia is pro-US. What this means is that Saudi Arabia has military bases, American military bases, inside of the Holy Land. And for the Iranians, that is the worst crime, right? Because it's infidels who are protecting the Holy Land. Infidels are not allowed in the Holy Land, right? If you're not a Muslim, you're not allowed to go to Mecca, all right? All right, so Saudi Arabia and Iran hate each other. Saudi Arabia has a huge problem in that it is an oil economy. Most of its GDP comes from oil exports. And for the longest time, it was trying to build a knowledge economy. It was trying to build tourism. It was trying to promote games, okay? Does not work. So if you're Saudi Arabia and you see the future, it's a pretty dismal future because eventually your oil is going to run out. Eventually people are going to switch to electrical vehicles, digitalization, which means that oil is no longer so important, okay? So what you need to do is, if you're able to control the Middle East, right? So where you get your money now is from trade access, the Strait of Hormuz. That's a viable future. If you just sit back and wait, eventually your nation's gonna run out of oil and therefore it's going to cease to exist. Okay, so Saudi Arabia needs to act now. And the way that it wants to act is it wants to create a conflict between the United States, Israel, and Iran where they destroy each other. Once they destroy each other, Saudi Arabia can come up on top. Now, Israel cannot be destroyed because Israel has nuclear weapons. But the goal is to negotiate a peace with Israel after the war is over. Right? Does that make sense? To split the Middle East between Israel and Saudi Arabia. But will Israel agree to this deal? Probably not. But according to game theory, Saudi Arabia has no choice in this matter because it is so far behind everyone else. Okay? It can only hope that this chaos leads to new possibilities. Because given the structure of the game so far, it does not have a very good future. Okay? Does that make sense? All right, any more questions, guys? All right, okay, great questions. So please continue to follow the war, okay? So you have to follow the war and understand what's going on. And in this class, what I'm doing is I'm providing you the game theory analysis for you to understand what's happening and why it's happening and where this war is going, okay? And again, the three big predictions I make, and we'll know in the next year or two if these three things happen or not, is the United States will send in ground troops. It has no choice in the matter if it wants to win this war or continue this war. There will be no nuclear weapons being used. Again, I will apologize to the world if nuclear weapons are used, okay? The third is that the Al-Aqsa Mosque will be destroyed at some point. And it's something that I will talk about next class.